Right, good evening ladies and gentlemen, welcome along to tonight's meeting of the Rushcliffe Borough Council Planning Committee. My name is Councillor Richard Butler, I'm the chairman of the committee. To my left is Councillor John Stockwood, who is my vice chairman. To his left is Mrs Soul, who is the borough solicitor. We also have Mrs Coop, who will be joining us in a moment, who is from our constitutional services section. And to my right is Mr Pegram, who is the service manager for communities. So we'll start the agenda. Apologies for absence and substitute members, please. And Councillor Edwards.
Just to record, Chair, that I'll have to leave the meeting by 8:30.
Understood. I understand the reasons as well, so thank you for that. Otherwise, I think we're all present and hopefully correct. So do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Purdy-Horrow. Sorry, say again.
Permanently
I think you probably are on the committee. You are a member. So do we have any declarations of interest under the Code of Conduct and or under the Planning Code, please? No? Okay, thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting held on the 17th of January. For those members who were here, are we happy that they're correct? Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'll just sign them. And it's signed and dated. Of course, it's Valentine's Day tomorrow. What way to spend a Valentine's evening? It's a planning meeting. Oh, I didn't hear that. Right, so we will now go into the main items on the agenda, which are tonight's planning applications. The first item on the agenda is 54 Park Lane, Sutton Bonington. This is a partial demolition of a dormer bungalow and construction of a single and two-storey extension to form two-storey dwelling, and it's a revised scheme. Mr Pegram, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the application relates to 54 Park Lane, which is the property outlined in red on the screen before you. It's on the western side of Park Lane. Properties flank north and south and open fields to the rear. That's the aerial photograph, just confirming position of the building, showing you a bit more detail in the area. Members will probably recall you have considered an application on this site previously when more of the bungalow was to be demolished and effectively creating a conventional two-storey dwelling on the site. Just to run through the photographs, there is a mix of development along Park Lane. You'll see from the photographs there are a number of dormer bungalows, or chalet bungalows you might call them, that look like this. There are also two-storey houses. So there is a mix in design. There's no consistent rhythm or form along this part of Park Lane. That's the application property in question. Again, looking head on, and you can see the relationship with the neighbouring properties. Important probably at this point to note the ridge line of the property. There is a significant difference between the previous proposal and what's proposed in this application. That's looking across, so that's picking up the property next door at number 56, and then looking the other way to number 52. Now we're at the rear of the property, looking at the application property from the rear, existing single-storey flat roof garage to the side. That's looking again across to number 56, and you'll see they have a conservatory on the rear here, and there's a high-level window in that position. Then looking the other way at number 52, again has a secondary window to a living room here, and a bedroom window in the gable. Members may recall that the previous application was refused by committee. It was subject of an appeal. The appeal was dismissed. The inspector was concerned predominantly with the impact on this property. He accepted there was some impact on the property the other side, although to a lesser extent. And this application seeks to address some of those comments that were made by the inspector. That's standing close to the boundary looking at number 52. So again, just to show, that's the resultant footprint. And if I do something rather clever here, I can probably zoom in for that a bit so you can see the footprint in relation to the neighbouring properties. So comes out roughly level with the rear of number 52. It does step out further on this side. Portion at the back, as you'll see from the plans in a moment, is single story projection. That was the previous scheme that was refused. In particular, some of the major differences is that the projection beyond the rear elevation of the original chalet bungalow from this point was about 6.6 metres to the end of the orangery. 4.25 metres of that was the orangery, so the balance of that was a two-storey building coming out from the rear of what was the original chalet bungalow. That's the street scene of the previous proposal, and again you'll note that again there was a greater projection to the rear on this side, and that was where reading the inspector's decision was of greatest concern. So that's the existing property as you've seen in the photographs, and the scheme which is before you this evening retains a good deal more of the original chalet bungalow. So again, if I zoom in a moment. So again, I pointed out the ridge line of the photographs, and you'll see from the side elevation, much of that form is shown, or that form of the original chalet bungalow is shown white there. The additional bits are the coloured in bits. And you'll see that the ridge line, the predominant ridge line of the resultant building, retains the original height of the original chalet bungalow. Extensions to front and rear, largest extension obviously on this side, which replaces the garage. That's looking at the rear of the building, so the gable comes through to the rear. And the extension which projects here is about 3.9 metres, single storey, so the whole of that portion is single storey. And then you have the two-storey projection dropping down to a single-storey projection on the southern side of the building. And then that's the southern elevation. So you can see from the floor plans there's a slight extension on the front of the building there. That line is the line of the original front elevation, so it steps out, and that part is single-storey. The two-storey extension that runs front to back with a single-storey projection beyond that point, and then all of that portion there is single-storey. And that just shows you the first floor plans. That's the street scene, so you can see again there is a change in the appearance of the building, but given the mix of dwelling types along the road, it's not considered that that's unsympathetic to the character and appearance of the area. And the ridge line retained largely, as I say, that's the original ridge line, so sits more comfortably than the previous scheme in the street scene. Chairman, obviously it's an extension to an existing dwelling. Your officers have looked carefully at the inspector's report and the concerns that he raised. We believe that this scheme does address a majority of those concerns, particularly the impact on the property at number 52, this one. On that basis, Chairman, the application is before you with a recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pegram. Now we have speakers on this application. We have three speakers. First of all, Mr. McHugh, who is speaking on behalf of the applicant. The way it works is if you come up to the chair and make yourself comfortable, as they say. And as soon as you have up to 5 minutes, and you press the right-hand button, the red light will come on, and this will start counting down. And even if you're mid-sentence, at 5 minutes, we have to stop you. And it's not a two-way; it's just a one-way presentation. So as soon as you're ready, you can address the committee. Thank you.
My name is Ian McHugh. I'm a chartered town planner, and I am speaking in support of this application on behalf of the applicants. Firstly, I wish to comment on the intentions of Mr. and Mrs. Hall. An impression has been given that this is a development project for financial gain. This is not the case, and in any event, it's not a planning consideration. Mr. and Mrs. Hall currently live close to Sutton Bonington, and they have purchased number 54 with the intention of residing there for the remainder of their lives. The property is currently unsuited to their needs because of its condition, internal arrangement and relatively small room sizes. They have been trying to buy property in the area for a number of years and hope to make it a home in which they can accommodate visiting family and friends. The applicants have considered the decisions made on the previous application by the council and the inspector, and they have sought to address the concerns of all parties, including neighbouring residents. However, the issues remain the same, and I will address each one in turn. Character and appearance. Concerns were previously expressed by the council and the inspector over the scale of the earlier proposal. In particular, the inspector referred to the height of the development and the extent of projection at the front and its relationship with neighbouring dwellings. The applicants have sought to address these concerns by lowering the ridge height. As a result, it is now comparable to the height of numbers 52 and 56 on either side. In addition, the proposed front extensions have been broken up with small gable structures at first floor level. Furthermore, the front projection adjacent to number 52 is now single storey, and the larger two-storey element gabled, has been moved to the opposite side of the dwelling. As a result, it will be positioned behind the front wall of number 56, and as a consequence, it will appear more subordinate and less prominent in the street scene. Overall, the amendments have the effect of reducing the bulk and mass of the proposed building, and it now has a more comfortable visual relationship with numbers 52 and 56. The applicants have taken into account the provisions of the development plan and the council's design guide. Whilst the extended dwelling will be larger than the existing property, the guide is only a guide, and consequently each application must be considered on its merits. Furthermore, the predominant character of the area is that of two-storey dwellings. These are either traditional houses or dwellings with accommodation in the roof. The proposed development is characteristic of its surroundings, and it will not appear visually at odds in the street scene. With regard to living conditions, the applicants have sought to redesign the proposal in order to reduce the effect on numbers 52 and 56 in terms of outlook and natural light. The inspector found that there would only be some limited effect on the occupants of number 56, but the reduction in outlook and light from number 52 would be unacceptable. Consequently, the applicants have sought to redesign the proposal to reduce the impact on number 52, whilst not increasing the effect on number 56. The current proposal significantly reduces the scale and mass of the building on the northern elevation facing 52. A shallow, sloping roof structure at first floor level that projects out no further than the rear wall of the existing building, plus a single-storey rear extension, also with a shallow sloping roof, will ensure that the effect on light and outlook to and from number 52 is now at an acceptable level. It is also noted the ground floor side window at number 52 does not appear to be the only window to that room. With regard to the effect on number 56, the applicants have ensured that the two-storey element does not project at the rear beyond the neighbouring conservatory. Whilst parts of the proposed extension will be visible through the high-level lounge window on the side of 56 and through the roof of the conservatory, such views will be limited and will not be unacceptably harmful. Concern has been expressed that the applicants will be able to look into the conservatory at number 56. This is not the case, as the rear wall of the extension will be in line with the rear of the conservatory. In addition, an existing first floor side window will be blocked off. In conclusion, the revised proposal has significantly reduced the impact of the development both on the street scene, the character and appearance of the area. In addition, the effect on the outlook from and levels of natural light entering into numbers 52 and 56 has been significantly reduced to a level where there is no undue harm to the living conditions of the occupants. Accordingly, it is requested that you agree with your officer recommendation and grant planning permission. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr McHugh. That's just in time. And our next speaker on this is an objector, Mr Wilson, please.
Just recently had a hip operation, so if you don't mind, I'll stand rather than try.
Yes, whatever you're more comfortable with. Yes, that's fine. As soon as you're ready, the clock will start counting. Thank you.
Sorry, press the... The clock's going. No. Right. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Philip Wilson. For 34 years, my wife and I have lived at 52 Park Lane. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about our objections to the revised plans for 54 Park Lane. And I'm using a scale model to help with the presentation. The model shows the end elevation of 52 with south-facing windows and 54 as it is now. The end elevation of 54 is situated 3 feet from the boundary and offset 10 feet to the east. This means the outlook from the south-facing windows at 52 is unrestricted, and daylight and sunshine into the house is also unrestricted, and there is very little overshadowing. If the proposal goes ahead, the garage will be demolished. Then a 2-storey block, twice the length of the present elevation, and with a higher roof line running east to west, will be built next to the southern boundary. And it will look like this. A single-storey extension and first-floor extension will go on the rear and will look like this. The proposal also involves single-storey and first-floor extensions, as we've heard, to the front elevation, but are not shown on this model. These include 2 dormer-type extensions, one of which is the height of the main roof. Overall, the result is the complete loss of the original property and a structure which is overly dominant, and being built close to the boundaries on both sides would appear very cramped within the plot. If I turn the model around, you can see the impact the proposal has on each elevation. The front elevation shows how the large 2-storey extension makes it very cramped within the plot. The south side elevation shows the full extent of the 2-storey block. Mr. and Mrs. Toon, who live at number 56, could not be here this evening, but are devastated to think that this large structure will only be 1 metre from their home. The rear elevation shows how large the extensions will create overshadowing and result in significant loss of outlook and daylight to the south-facing windows. Following the planning inspector's comments and decision to dismiss the appeal in August 2018 because, quote, the proposal would detract from the character and appearance of the area and would unacceptably harm the living conditions of the residents at 52 Park Lane, end of quote, this revised application does not sufficiently reflect the inspector's comments and does little to change that decision. Although some attempt has been made to address the inspector's comments, the revised development, by virtue of its height, its scale, its bulk and its mass, still results in overbearing impacts on 52 and 56. Our bungalow is the last in a row of 12 along this section of Park Lane, which gives the area its distinctive character. In my letter of objection to the council, I enclose photographs of the 12 bungalows showing the similar roof heights, but there are no 2-storey extensions. The residents of all the bungalows, except 54, gave me their approval for the photos to be used in support of our objection. I don't know if the committee members have seen these, but I do have copies here if they were helpful. Finally, this revised scheme still seeks to replace a modest 2-bedroom bungalow with a large 4-bedroom 2-storey house, at least twice the size of the original. It would mean our home is uncomfortably sandwiched between two larger two-storey properties, causing loss of amenities we have enjoyed for 34 years. It will have a negative impact on the consistent shared and ingrained character respected by the residents of the 12 bungalows for over 3 decades. I therefore request the members of the committee refuse permission for this revised development of a two-storey dwelling on 54 Park Lane. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. That was well within time as well, and thank you for the model as well. And our third speaker on this is the ward member, Councillor Brown, please. And you also have up to 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. As you will be aware, a very similar two-storey house on this site has already been refused by this committee and dismissed at appeal following a significant number of objections from neighbours, the parish council and myself. The current proposal is for another two-storey dwelling and therefore we object again. On the previous scheme, the inspector stated that the two-storey dwelling would be overly dominant and would appear cramped within the plot, particularly given the contrast with the neighbouring buildings. It would result in unacceptable harm to the character and appearance of the area. The inspector specifically noted that he was well aware of other two-storey dwellings in the area, yet still he concluded that the two-storey proposal would do unacceptable harm to the character and appearance of the area. Therefore, the conclusion must be that a two-storey house, by definition, causes unacceptable harm. The parish council has gone to some length to describe the character of the area. This has been based on extensive local knowledge plus the expertise of an architect with over 40 years' experience of residential design who is a current member of that council. This has been submitted as part of their objection but was unfortunately not included in the full officer's report. It includes a description as how important it is to understand that Park Lane is actually seen as a series of smaller, separate and very distinctive character areas. Number 54 sits in one of these areas with which is defined by its run of 12 bungalows. Neither the applicant nor the council have done an equivalent analysis to justify their design. Their simple analysis relies solely on the contention that the proposal is acceptable because there are other two-storey properties in the area. As already noted, the inspector has dismissed this as a justification. Adding a few bungalow-style elements to a two-storey house is not an acceptable way to address the significant issues raised by the inspector. It is clear to us that the strong conclusions of the inspector that were only a bungalow would ensure no harm to the character of the area. Instead, we are faced with another two-storey house with no character appraisal to justify it. The 12 bungalows that give the local sense of place were built many decades ago, many with covenant, including the applicant's site, to ensure the bungalow heights were retained. I believe that this was to protect the community views over the fields to the south. I know that covenants are not a planning matter, but the key issue is that every occupier of these 12 bungalows has respected this community desire. They have done so because they recognise the importance to the community as a whole, and the result is that the community is strong and the historical context is protected. The report to committee confirms that RBC Residential Design Guide is a material consideration. It is not merely guidance, but has been used by the council to assess the quality of housing schemes since 2009. The report to committee identifies certain relevant criteria in relation to this proposal, but gives no assessment as to how and why there have been a failure to comply with these criteria and what might be the mitigating benefits. Some of the critical criteria and failures are as follows. Extensions should be designed so that they are not readily perceived as add-ons to the original building. The proposal clearly fails since it has a two-storey house replacing a bungalow. As a general rule, the style and design of the original dwelling should remain the dominant element with the extension subordinate to it. Again, a complete failure. Development proposal should relate to and respect the character of the context. The two-storey proposal sits in a row of 12 bungalows, so how can this be complied with? A clear analysis of what makes place necessary if new development is to sit comfortably in a particular environment. Only the parish council has completed this clear analysis and they conclude that the proposal does significant harm. There are absolutely no benefits to the local community in mitigation of these failures. The The Parish Council have identified the important characteristics relating to the row of bungalows, and these have been ignored. Finally, the Residential Design Guide requests that the Council should assess the wider consequences on the area in setting a precedent by allowing a scheme. My view is that if allowed, this scheme would set two negative precedents. Firstly, that all the bungalows would be under threat of rebuild, and secondly, it would allow any future applications to be decided on minimal character analysis, such that it would be enough to describe Sutton Bonington's character as being defined solely as a place where there are some two-storey houses. Surely this goes against every desire to create strong and distinctive communities. Mr. Chairman and members, I strongly urge you again to refuse this application. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. So we've heard there from Mr McHugh speaking on behalf of the applicant, and Mr Wilson and Councillor Brown who are objecting for the reasons heard and in the report. Would you like to pick up on those, please?
Just a couple of points, Chairman. If I can start by making a correction in the report, or picking up on a typo. Paragraph 37 says, in conclusion, it is not considered the proposal is proportionate to the size of the plot. There's too many nots, Chairman, in that paragraph. It should have been, it is considered to be proportionate to the size of the plot. If I start, Chairman, with one of the early comments that Councillor Brown made, he says that the scheme is very similar to the two-storey house already refused and dismissed at appeal. That is the two-storey house that was refused and dismissed at appeal. The scheme that members are considering this evening is that one, so I would leave you as decision makers to decide how similar it is indeed to what was previously refused. There's mention of no character appraisal, Chairman. This type of application in this location, it's not in a conservation area, doesn't have to be accompanied by a design and access statement. There's comment that no one else other than the Parish Council has carried out a design appraisal. Clearly, Chairman, your officers have in considering the application. Mention was made of views and covenants, which, as you are fully aware, are not material planning considerations. The main, and precedent was also mentioned. Chairman, precedent, case law and appeal decisions will tell us is not a reason for refusal of permission. Each application must be considered on its own merits. The main issue probably, Chairman, is the potential tension, if you like to call it, with our residential design guide. The design guide is a guide, it's not policy. It is intended to guide how proposals are designed and come forward. In some respects, the comments about not perceived as merely add-ons or they should be subordinate to the original dwelling are easily applied when we're dealing with a two-storey extension to the side or a single-storey extension to the rear, and you've got one on the agenda tonight, which perhaps applies. This is a little bit more different to that. It does involve remodelling of the property, so it's not directly applicable, that advice, in my view. You must consider the scheme on the design and appearance and mass of the resultant building. The only issue I would draw attention to, Chairman, is again, if you recall, the previous scheme had a very a two-storey element coming out here with a single-storey orangery on the back coming out about 6.6 metres from that point. It has been reduced significantly in scale at this point. Obviously, that is set on the opposite side of the building, so it's in the background, as you'll see there. That extension is only 3.9 metres. It could be, the applicant could put an extension on the rear of this property that projects out 4 metres under permitted development rights, having a similar impact to what is shown on the image there. So clearly that's another factor which I feel is relevant in considering it. There is a fallback position effectively if they wanted to extend on the rear of the property. This scheme sets the bulk of the addition on the far side of the building. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr Pegram. So we can now start discussing the application. We've heard arguments for and against. Who would like to start on this, please? Councillor Jones.
I can see that there's been changes from the first application, but to me, in appearance, it looks quite a mishmash. But I'm particularly interested in two things. One is the Parish Council characterised the distinctive character of the area in paragraph 16, in a way that wasn't really compatible with the officer's presentation. And I'm just interested on the officer's comments, because you appeared to show us large houses as characteristic of the area, whereas the parish council say to the west there's 12 largely untouched bungalows, which I didn't see in the presentation. And secondly, there's talk about the proposal would be sandwiched between the two adjacent properties, and I'm interested to see whether the proposal is wider than what sat on that plot in the first place. Can you help with that, please?
Yes, Chairman. Just in terms of the character of the area, Park Lane is as I say, quite a mixed character. There are a run of bungalows or chalet bungalows similar in appearance as you see in the photograph. There are also, okay, we've only got at the moment the picture showing that one, but I can assure members, and some members will be familiar with the area, that there is a varied mix of buildings up and down Park Lane. So from that point of view, it's not an area with a distinct and consistent rhythm or pattern of development. In terms of the width of the building,
The parish council said there are 12 largely untouched bungalows to the west. Were you showing us those, or were you showing us to the east?
East, to the east.
Oh, and to the east, well-spaced, detached and semi-detached houses. Were you showing us the east and not the west? Is that
that's the western side of
right?
Park Lane.
So there are 12 bungalows along there.
I'm not sure if the parish council are referring to these ones along here. They would be south of the plot, obviously. In terms of the width of the building in the plot, as you'll see from this slide, if I find my cursor, that is the existing side elevation of the original property. The garage comes out here and then cuts in there to the point there. So in terms of overall width, the property, the resultant building, wouldn't encroach any closer to neighbouring boundary than the existing building, albeit the mass in this area would be larger than the existing building, and it would come out further to the rear. But in terms of the looking from the front, the width remains as is, albeit, as I say, it's greater mass at that point.
Sorry, could you just clarify down the right-hand side where the old line was, which is now...
This one,
Yeah.
this side.
Yeah,
So there's as you saw in the photographs and in the plans, there's a single-storey garage sits in that area there. The full height building sits on that footprint there. So on that boundary it comes down. You can just see the faint red line. In fact, I can find my cursor. That's better. So you can see the faint red line where the garage is. So the garage comes down into the side of the bungalow, and then the bungalow carries on along and then comes across there. So you can see that in relation to the proposed works. Yes.
Is that helpful?
It's helpful, it's not an amendment to the proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Bushman.
I was most impressed with Mr. Hall's model. Hopefully it was Mr. Wilson, was it? I beg your pardon. Yes, Mr. Wilson. Sorry, sir. Yes, I was rather impressed with Mr. Wilson's model, and hopefully if it was to scale, it certainly appears that the house is going to double in size. Now, I wonder if we could just have some sort of idea as to how much extra meterage, floor meterage, is going to be if this is allowed.
Pegram.
Chairman, quite simply, we haven't carried out that calculation because it's irrelevant. If we were dealing with a dwelling in the Greenbelt, then obviously the test there as to whether it's not inappropriate development is whether there's a disproportionate increase in size of the building. This is in a built-up area already, so it's not a question. We don't apply percentage increases to dwellings within built-up areas or existing runs of property. The assessment that you must carry out as decision makers is the scale, appearance and design of the resultant building and how that sits within the existing fabric.
However, is it not in fact, on appearance from Mr. Wilson's model and from the plans, that the building is going to be probably twice the size as it originally is? However, it appears that it's going to be a lot bigger than any other building in that street.
Chairman, I have to repeat that the increase in size is the actual percentage increase or square meterage increase is irrelevant. You must consider it based on the scale, appearance and design of the resultant building.
And that's an important point. You can't get too detailed on precise size differences. It's appearance and scale that is a crucial.
All I wanted to know was, in fact, is the building going to be twice the size?
It's irrelevant, Chairman.
Well, well, as Mr. Pegram's explained, you can't consider that on this sort of application. But all you can consider is the application that we're looking at and the diagrams and the information we have. Who else would like to come in on this? Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. These sorts of applications are always rather difficult, aren't they? Because we've seen this before fairly recently, and that was rejected, and the inspector supported that rejection. It's clear that the applicant has taken several steps to address the criticisms of both the committee and the inspector. It's particularly good that the overall ridge height has not been increased, and because in some of those pictures there was a two-storey house further along which has a higher ridge height than what is being proposed. I think that interpretation is correct. The officers have looked at the new submission and they've reached the conclusion that it has addressed the bulk of the inspector's concerns. I think Mr. Pegram said the majority of them. And therefore, to help the discussion along, Chair, I would propose the recommendation for approval.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. And do you have a seconder for that? Councillor Mrs. Smith, do you wish to say anything at this stage?
Just to ask Mr. Pegram to confirm that the extent of the permitted development that could take place, it didn't include the bottom extension, did it?
Are you clear on what
If they didn't get you said the...
Yes, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, just to clarify, I'm not suggesting they could build this under permitted development, otherwise we wouldn't be sat here tonight discussing it. The issue was the inspector, in assessing the previous proposal, and in particular the impact on number 52, which is the property next door, was concerned about the scale, bulk and mass of the building and its relationship with this property, including, although to my mind he gave surprising weight to what is a secondary window, albeit south-facing. My comment in that respect, Chairman, was just to highlight that the bulk has been significantly reduced in this area. It's no longer from about that point, a full two-storey house with a conventional roof on, and then 4.25 metres of orangery. It's now reduced significantly in scale. You can build a single-storey extension on the rear of a property which projects out 4 metres without any reference to the local planning authority. You can actually go up to 8 metres, if you submit an application for what's called prior approval. So it's just to highlight that in considering this proposal, some weight should perhaps be given to what, what could be built in that area under permitted development. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. Councillor Smith, is that helpful? Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Just first of all, just to be clear, so the members of the committee have absorbed it. Sorry, can you just bring up the photograph, please, of from the streets, just the general. Yep, I'll do. Oh, I'll do. Yep. So the subject site is the one with the silver car in the gravel or whatever. So that bungalow behind the silver car, that is the first of 12 bungalows that stretch out. That's the reference to the 12. So just so the members of the committee are clear about that. However, we need to be considering this as what is reasonable, I think. And you could argue in the first instance that planning committee has done its job because it rejected the first proposal, which was clearly a lot more overbearing. The inspector agreed, and so we prevented the very much greater domineering proposal that however many months ago it was. And so the effect has been very much mitigated on number 52. As Mr. Pegram said, an element of it could be built under permitted development. And I think the main issue for us to consider is whether the large two-storey element on the southern side of the site, whether that still has any major effect on number 56. If the orientation was the other way around, in which case if the subject site was on the southern side of number 56, then obviously it will be blocking out an awful lot of the main sunshine. But clearly it's not the case, it's on the northern side. So I think really the main decision for us to make is whether we consider that two-storey element is injurious to number 56. And I'd like just Mr. Pegram, could he just detail again the windows in both the proposal and in 56, stroke, conservatory, whatever, so that we can just be absolutely sure whether there is any major impact of that two-storey. Because I'm tending towards, I'm not decided yet, but I'm tending towards agreeing with the proposal because the point has already been made, the ridge height is now no greater. So we've achieved that in our mitigation of the original proposal. So, sorry, Mr. Pegram, could you just detail to us, I just want to be sure, as regards the effect on number 56.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just to clarify also the point I made that I think Councillor Edwards picked up on when I said that the scheme had addressed the majority of the issues. Clearly the one issue that remains for you as decision makers to assess is the design of the building in the street scene. That's a point where clearly there's a matter of judgment and subjective judgment. In terms of the impact on the neighbouring property at 56, there's a high-level window there, which is, I understand from reading the appeal decision, is a lounge window. If we then go to the back, you have the conservatory, which, as you can see at this point, is a solid wall. It's not glass like some conservatories, with a glass or polycarbonate roof on the building. So the extension would come out here. We heard from the agent or the person speaking on behalf of the applicant. Doesn't come any further than the end of the conservatory. The plans would seem to confirm that. The inspector did acknowledge, but again in relation to the previous scheme, that it would be visible through the roof of the conservatory and have an impact. However, as I say, Chairman, he was more concerned about impact on number 52, the other side. So again, Chairman, it is a matter of judgment. I can't sit here and say there won't be any impact. As I've often said to the committee, all development has some impact. It's your job as decision makers and us as officers to determine when that impact becomes unacceptable. The building is on the north side of this number 56, so in terms of overshadowing and loss of sunlight, that in my view would be minimal if at all. It's then a question of the visual impact of that element. Does that help?
Yeah, just keeping that photo there just a moment before you probably need to go to a plan. Could you just, because to me, looking at just purely the photograph, the subject building looks like it's actually closer to the photographer than the conservatory. But from my understanding of the plan, if I recall it correctly, it's not quite the case. Can you just, I'm just the relationship again of the proposal to the end of the conservatory.
Yeah, perhaps if I can refer members to the plan firstly on page 13, the Ordnance Survey plan. You can see there the rear wall of number 56 appears to sit roughly in line with the rear of the garage on number 54. So that would be the original rear wall, roughly level with the back of that garage. You then have the conservatory, which isn't shown on the Ordnance Survey plan, not our doing, Chairman, it's Ordnance Survey. But then if we go to the, that's probably the best one, and if I do some trickery again, zoom in. So again, you can see, go back the other way, there's the conservatory. That is the footprint of the extension, but the two-storey bit does not come out the full extent of that.
Right, yeah.
It's in line roughly with the end of the conservatory.
Fine. Yeah, okay, I can understand that. Just a final one. Can you just go back to, there was an oblique view across, looking back towards, in the rear garden, looking back towards number 52. Something like that. So, I suppose the only other thing left for us to consider is whether the two-storey element that's just out of the picture on the right-hand side, whether that is going to have any significant impact on, well, either the ground floor or that first floor window. So just what's the distance from the two-storey element to there? And then, because basically what we're left with is what's reasonable. People are within reason allowed to do what they want to their property with permission. And we just need to bear in mind that if there are any objections, that there's got to be sufficient that we could actually defend it. Because as I said at the very beginning, I think we have done our main job of reducing it from the original significantly. Well, there is the issue of design as well.
That is another consideration, yes. Are we getting the ruler out here? The scale
Resorting
ruler
to old style, Chairman.
Yes.
Quite right.
So, Chairman, the width of the single-storey element before you get to the two-storey element is approximately 7.8 metres. Check that against the other plan. Yes, so if I go back to the plans and look at the rear elevation. So obviously this doesn't project out any further than the side of the original chalet bungalow, and the distance from there to there is roughly 7.8 metres, plus obviously the slight distance off the boundary perhaps, but that's obviously the distance of that two-storey element.
Okay. Yes, so I suppose Councillor Jones pointed out it's just a question in my view, of the design, whether the front elevation looks very busy, but you know, that's down to people's personal opinions to a certain extent. So, you know, I think it's a question, as I said, of being reasonable.
Okay, right, thank you. I think we've had, I don't think there's anyone else wanted to speak on this. We've had the recommendation moved and seconded as per the report. We've had I think an in-depth discussion on this and looked at all the points, so I think we're here to make a decision, we need to make a decision. So a show of hands please in favour of the recommendation to grant permission as per the report. Can I please have a show of hands in favour? Seven. And those against? 7-4. So it's 7 in favour, 4 against. Therefore, permission is granted as per the report. Thank you. But I hope everybody understands we are here to make a decision, and it's never easy, but we have covered points. Thank you. Councillor Hull has to sit elsewhere for this item because she is the ward member, so won't be taking part in this discussion. And the next agenda item is 8 Cherry Street, Bingham. It's a new 2-storey side extension and a single-storey rear extension. Thank you, Mr. Peckler.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the application relates to 8 Cherry Street in Bingham. It's a property which is outlined in red on the screen before you. This is Longacre and obviously Cherry Street running north-south. Just in terms of a little bit of history of the property, this is a listed building, and this is what was the orchard to that listed building, and there is reference in the report to some remaining trees within these plots. The application is for a 2-storey side extension and a single-storey rear extension. That's the aerial photograph, just again confirming the pattern of development in the area. And then this is the property looking across the road in the northwesterly direction. So the property that you're considering this evening is this half of the pair. And then looking back the other way, there's effectively 2 similar pairs sit on the street. That's the application property we're looking at with the listed building in the background. That's looking head on at the pair, and again this is the one that you're considering this evening. And then looking into the property, driveway in, application property. The other thing you may have noticed on the elevation, on the the street plan, was that there is a new dwelling built next door to the listed building, and the access to that building runs between the listed building and the application site. So again, you can see that access that serves that dwelling in there. So that's the listed building with the access running behind it. That's looking across the street again, so you're now picking up both properties in the view. And then looking back, this is stood in the garden of the neighbouring listed building, looking back at the rear elevation of that property. Not too sure what's going on here, Chairman, but well, it's our conservation officer. So proof that he's been to the site, Chairman. This is looking north from the garden of the neighbouring property, so the extension would be in here. I will make reference at this point to this downpipe. The 2-storey extension is set back from the front elevation as is advocated by the design guide, and that point has been measured and it sits pretty much on the line of that downpipe. So that's the block plan, again just confirming the position of the extensions in red. That's that access I referred to, so you can see the newish dwelling that sits in there, and that access separates the listed building from the neighbouring property. Again, just showing you a bit more detail, the 2-storey element is the bit that sits alongside, set back, as I say, roughly to the point where that drain pipe was located, flush with the rear elevation, eaves height the same as the original house. The step back introduces a break in the ridge, so it's subordinate to the main house, and then a single-storey extension which runs across the rear of the two-storey extension and part of the original dwelling, set off the boundary with the neighbouring property. That's the property as you've seen in the photographs. That's the existing floor plan layout, and the proposal is for a two-storey extension, as we've said, and a single-storey extension at the rear. So again, it ends roughly there. I think there's a line missing off the drawing, but it ends there. It doesn't go across the full width of the building. And that's the resultant floor plan layout. At ground floor and then first floor. Chairman, the site is in the Bingham Conservation Area. You've also seen there is a neighbouring listed building. There is also other listed buildings in the area, including the church to the north. So the scheme has been considered very carefully by your conservation officer. In accordance with section 72 of the Listed Building Conservation Area Act, we have to give special regard to the desirability for preserving and enhancing the character and appearance of the conservation area. Similarly, in accordance with section 66, we have to give special regard to the desirability for preserving and enhancing the setting of a listed building. Your conservation officer has considered this application both in terms of its impact on the conservation area and nearby listed buildings, and is satisfied that the proposal would cause no harm. So it effectively preserves, it doesn't enhance, but it does preserve, and it therefore satisfies the objective described as desirability in those relevant sections of the Act. The other aspects which are relevant to this consideration, Chairman, are the general design, appearance and scale of the extension and its impact on neighbouring properties. You will see, looking at this, there is a window at first floor. If we go back to the floor plans, that you can see that that is an ensuite. So we're satisfied that that wouldn't result in unacceptable overlooking of the neighbouring property. And again, if we go back to the layout plan, just remind members there is that driveway between the two properties, again helping to provide a separation in terms of any potential overbearing impacts. Chairman, as I say, it's been carefully considered. It's considered to be an acceptable proposal, causing no harm to the conservation area or the nearby listed buildings, and is therefore before you with a recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. And we have one speaker on this, who is the ward member, Councillor Mrs. Hull, please. It's musical chairs, isn't it? There to there and back again. But so as soon as you're ready, as usual, for up to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application for a two-storey side and single rear extension to a 1920s semi-detached property can only be described as a large extension. Cherry Street is an important part of the Bingham Conservation Area. It has had changes over the years, but all the changes have occurred on the odd-numbered side of the road. The even side of Cherry Street contains only this set of 4 semi-detached houses and nothing else, and has remained so for 99 years. Turning into Cherry Street from Long Acre, which is the main bus route into the town, the extension would be fully visible. The street scene on the opposite side contains terraced house of 3 cottages, 2 detached cottages, 4 large houses, and 2 modern houses that are built well back and with long driveways, so do not affect the street scene. At the end of Cherry Street, there's St Mary's Church, Church Street, and Church Lane, all of which are in the conservation area, a stone's throw from this property. Cherry Street is situated in an historic part of Bingham, whose history has been researched and recorded by Bingham Trails Association. If you walk a line travelling south to north, starting on the banks, who you all know, go along Jebb's Lane, the oldest lane in Bingham, across Long Acre into Cherry Street, at the side of the church, over the railway line and on the footpath to Parsons Hill. Now this represents the line of an ancient trackway linking the prehistoric Roman and Saxon settlements. It also links the core of Bingham with the Margadunan Roman fort, which is now a roundabout on the north of the town. When this roundabout was being excavated, a Roman well was found, and this was disassembled brick by brick and reassembled at the entrance to Bingham Cemetery. The land occupied currently by number 8 and 6 Cherry Street was first a home in 1586. In 1776, a house and garden was surrounded by a large close, including the current residence, 67 Longacre. In 1910, except for 67 Longacre, the houses were gone and an orchard was developed. The former owner of 8 Cherry Street was Jill Kendrick, whose father designed these 4 semi-detached houses. And the local chemist, Mr. Cadge, built numbers 8 and 6 in 1920 and lived in number 6. Numbers 4 and 2 were built a couple of years later. An archaeological test pit was dug in the rear garden of 8 Cherry Street, revealing more Roman material found in this pit than in any other of the 53 pits dug in Bingham. Also, the pit is indicating the possibility of a late iron settlement before the Roman conquest. The grounds of 8 Cherry Street are an important and a substantial asset to Bingham's heritage. Prior to the development of Hassel Court Flats at the back of these houses, a survey was carried out by a team of archaeologists from Lincoln who unearthed a Roman cemetery. That cemetery is under the Hassel Court Flats. The borough has this report as part of the planning application for those flats. In view of its proximity to the semi-detached houses on Cherry Street, especially number 8, the probability of finding similar remains is extremely high. The street scene of Cherry Street is in one of the oldest parts of Bingham. Terrace cottages, semi-detached houses from 1920, all within a stone's throw of the church. If the committee chooses to grant this application, the Historic Associations of Bingham would urge a condition be applied that a full, in-depth archaeological survey should take place over the whole site prior to any development. The areas under the garage and driveway are particularly important, and the chances of finding Roman remains here is more certain than in any other property in the whole of Bingham. I hope the committee will refuse this application on the grounds of size, scale, massing and the impact on the street scene of historic Bingham's conservation area. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hull. Well within time again. So we don't have any other speakers on this, but Councillor Hull is against the application. She considers it large. She told us about the history of Cherry Street. There's been development only, alterations only on one side over the last 99 years. Referred to the street scene, conservation area, the history of this part of Bingham and heritage and archaeology, and also referred or asked if we did grant permission for a possible condition to do with a full archaeological survey. Would you like to pick up on those, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just to start in terms of the comment was made that this pair and the neighbouring pair have not changed since they were built. That in itself is not reason to refuse permission, even in a conservation area. The comments in the National Planning Practice Guide basically tells us that conservation is an active process of maintenance and managing change. So it's not about preventing change, it's about carefully managing that change. And as I said when I delivered the presentation, Chairman, the Conservation Officer has looked at this one. You saw he's been to the site, he's in the photographs, and he's looked at it both in terms of the impact on the conservation area and on nearby listed buildings. In terms of the archaeological interest, Chairman, the general approach when we are dealing with extensions to buildings is that accepting that the original building has already been constructed and there would have therefore have been some disturbance to the ground when that property was built, it's unlikely that there would be anything of any significance in the sort of areas where this work is likely to take place. Yes, if they wanted to build perhaps a very large building at the bottom of the garden, well away from the dwelling in more undisturbed areas, there may be more concern for finding some archaeological remains. I think it would be unreasonable on an application of this scale to require a full archaeological survey. However, Chairman, if members are concerned about that issue, the sort of midway point is a watching brief, so that when builders are on site digging the foundations, if they come across anything that looks a bit suspicious, they can stop work, get someone in, have a look at it and see if it's of any significance. But as I say, generally speaking, on extensions of the scale that we're dealing with, our conservation officer, who also gives archaeological advice, wouldn't be particularly concerned about a major impact on archaeology. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. So we don't have any other speakers on this, so we can go open up to discussion. So who would like to start on this one, please? Councillor Mayles.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, from what I can see, this side extension is going to be stepped back, as has been explained. It's behind the downpipe, and that in itself is an advantage. And the rear one will fit in nicely. I don't see any reason why it should be, we should object to it. And I would move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Mayles. Do you have a seconder at this stage for Councillor Bushman? Thank you. Just make a note of those. I've got Councillor Jones has indicated to speak. Yep. Oh,
Jones, it says Jones.
Yes, it does. So Councillor Jones. Yes.
Thank you. The point that interested me was I accept that the proposal is set back wherever that, which is better than it being straight up to the front, but it's still an extension. And I noticed in the comments that the Conservation Officer makes a number of comments which are suggesting it's a fairly fine judgment. In paragraph 14, he's accepting that the extension would be lower than the front elevation, but all views would be from the lower level of the road looking up towards the house, and the extension would be visible including from the junction of Cherry Street and Longacre. He accepts later on it says he accepts there would be an impact on the street scene, and the house would become distinctive from its three contemporary neighbours. So I mean, obviously there's members here from Bingham, but it looks to me as if that would appear a fine judgment about the impact on the conservation area. And I'd be interested in the views of members from the area. But I would take exception to the officer's comments about archaeology, because you've heard fairly convincing evidence that the area is rich in archaeological remains, and to simply allow builders to form a judgment about what's relevant or not. I know what most builders do, they just chuck it in the skip because it gets in the way and holds them up, and time is money. So I think if it were to be approved, it ought to be a very firm archaeological condition.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, of course, it is down to us as a committee. That's what we're here for, is our interpretation of the application. But the comment about the watching brief or your allegations, it wouldn't be a particularly good, robust way of checking for archaeology. Is probably unfair. Do you want?
Yes, Chairman. Maybe perhaps misled a little bit.
Yeah.
Normally, while the foundations are being dug, you would perhaps have an archaeologist on site. So it's not just down to the builder; it's down to the archaeologist looking in the trench and thinking, "Oh, what's that?" So it's not just down to the builder. And I accept that. Yes, builders get in there with their diggers and may not be quite so careful, but it would be, as I say, watching brief. Normally, you'd have an archaeologist on site when they're doing the excavation.
So I hope that makes it a little clearer. It's not just a builder relying on the builder. It is a professional as well. Now, Council.
The archaeology significance of Bingham had not been picked up in the report at all, which I find a bit surprising.
But again, we have the report from the specialist and professionals, and that's the information that we have to go on. But obviously, we heard Councillor Hull's explanation of her view about the history of Bingham and the archaeology as well, which I think has probably helped us. Councillor Clark, you've indicated to speak.
I was expecting maybe some other more local people might have been saying something. But
anybody can speak on any application.
Yes, I know. Yeah, I indicated to speak prior to Mr. Pegram's slight or partial clarification of his comments regarding the archaeology, because that is a concern. You know, how do you measure full archaeological survey as opposed to a partial or a whatever? I'm not suggesting a full survey, but I'm certainly concerned that wherever they are going to be digging, that it is absolutely checked, and anything that's underneath. You know, it's not just a question of digging a foundation, footings trench. Is there anything else that's likely to be disturbed underneath the floor as well? So there must be some condition somewhere that we can put on this that actually strengthens the fact that it's got to be absolutely checked, and that whilst footings are being dug, there is no chance of missing any archaeological finds. The other thing I want to pick up is the the materials, because obviously it is an important example of a red brick building with imperial bricks, and so I want some assurances about the materials as well.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Clark. Materials and then more on detailed archaeology.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, the lesson in archaeology, perhaps. You can go from a geophysical survey, which is basically not intrusive, it doesn't penetrate the ground, and that picks up on any particular finds. It's like an X-ray machine type situation. You can then have a full trial trench across the site. You can have a strip site and examine what comes out of the material, or, as I say, the sort of midway point between all of that, or the lower level, is the archaeological watching brief. As I say, the advice from our conservation officer, who also is well versed in archaeology, is that when you are dealing with extensions to buildings, unless they are of particularly large and involve excavation some way from the house, generally you would not expect to find anything necessarily that hasn't already been disturbed historically. The other aspect is that obviously archaeological finds can range from things that are of interest to things which are extremely important and have to be retained in situ, for instance, which might prevent development taking place. So I don't think we're at that scale on this proposal, given that it is an extension to an existing property. Just in terms of the materials, Chairman, if I get back, it's not red brick, it's rendered. And the proposal is, as I read it, is to...
Well, no, it's quite fundamental to look at the right pictures, Councillor Clark.
Sorry, Chair. I think the officer's talking about the scale of the building. We're talking about historical Bingham and archaeological remains that are there. Yeah. And I personally think the scale of the building is nothing to do with it. There should be a strip.
Yes, we'll have a further explanation.
Chairman, the reason the scale of the building is relevant, and it comes up on another application on the agenda, is because, as I explained, this property is 1920s, I think Councillor Hull said. So when that was built, there would have been footings dug, there would have been disturbance around the existing property. So anything that was potentially there may have already been disturbed. So again, the scale of the building, so if you're within 3, 4, 5 metres of the existing building, it's unlikely that there's going to be anything of any significance. If you were 10, 12, 15 metres from the existing building, particularly given that we've heard that the flats at the rear there was archaeological finds, then yes, you might have more chance of finding something which is of significance. That is why the scale of the development is particularly important when you're considering the potential for impact on archaeological remains.
Thank you.
Chairman, can I just clarify? My apologies. Yes, I got up on my screen the wrong house, the wrong building. It was the next lot of buildings which are red brick. So I apologise for that.
So you are now.
So it's just the archaeological.
Right. So you are now familiar with the facing of the brick, the building. Right. Councillor Purdue Horan, please, and you're a local member as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah. I only moved into Bingham in '96, so I'm not quite yet considered a proper resident. Cherry Street is a living and breathing street in the locality. We obviously don't say too much about the eastern side of Cherry Street because quite a few of those houses are 1960s, 70s. But I do agree, although the Romans didn't build this particular property, 1920s is probably the right period. And I recall when I first stood for election in Bingham, those properties, those semi-detached properties were lived in by mainly single elderly people, probably widows, widowers, that sort of arrangement. And over the years, Bingham is very popular and families are moving into Bingham over recent years. And in this particular case, this is a family dwelling now. And they need room. For various reasons, they've decided rather than moving again, they'll probably increase the living space in their property. If you just look behind, on that picture, if you just look behind, you can see a window, a dormer window in a roof. That is one particular dwelling in what we call Hassel Court, which was, that's perhaps a better example, of a number of buildings on what we used to call the old bowling green, which now moved across Longacre. And that used to be the back gardens, effectively, of the Earl of Chesterfield pub. I remember this committee giving permission for Hassel Court many years ago. I don't recall a significant archaeological watching brief on that. It was a much bigger, potentially more substantial area to find archaeological items. But I'm quite happy with Mr. Pegram's suggestion of a watching brief for that particular applicant property. I think they've taken into account the objections of the initial objections from the town council and others, and I think they've tried to meet those considerations. So I don't think this is an unreasonable proposition for that particular property, and I'm happy to support the recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Purdue-Horan. Did you want to come back on anything?
Chairman, just a bit of backpedalling from me, perhaps. I did suggest members may wish to consider a watching brief. They do need to consider that requirement carefully. Clearly, there is a cost involvement with that to any applicant in the cost of an archaeologist who has to be on site while those works are taking place. Also, I would direct members to the advice contained in the NPPG on the use of conditions in planning permission, which require us to apply 6 tests, which means that they have to be, in particular, reasonable and necessary. So again, Chairman, I've given you our views as officers on the potential for impact on archaeology. Just to repeat that, given the scale of the extensions, it's likely to be limited risk of impact on archaeology. We clearly haven't put a condition on when we considered it. So I say, if members are thinking along those lines, it has to be considered carefully, having regard to the tests for conditions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. Well, we heard from Councillor Purdue-Horan, who explained about a nearby development, Hassel Court, and in recent years, and apparent lack of discovery of any significant archaeological finds. And it's literally just very close. Well, it's very close to the building. But Councillor Bushman, you've seconded the recommendation. Do you want? Councillor Mayall's proposed and you seconded. Did you want to speak to make any comments?
I was more concerned about the fact that Councillor Hull mentioned about this the situation of Roman findings and this, that, and the other. But I don't, and I quite agree with Mr. Pegram. That plot, that area, has obviously been dug up before in the last 100 years or so. Therefore, I wouldn't ask for that condition to be made.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone else want to speak on this, or shall we make a decision? We've had quite a discussion. I suspect not. I think, so we've had the recommendation as per the report, moved and seconded, moved by Councillor Mettle, seconded by Councillor Bushman. Better have a show of hands. Those in favour of the recommendation as in the report, please show. That's 10. What? No, 9. And those against? 1. So that is. And any abstentions?
No, Councillor Hull is off.
Oh, of course, yes. So that's yes. I'm sorry, I forgot. I was forgetting the Council Hull's not going to vote on this. So that means permission is granted as per the report. But thank you for your contributions. Right, our next application is another Bingham application. So Councillor Hull will remain in the seat over there. This is 30 Longacre. It's a variation of conditions for.
No, sorry, it's an error in the agenda papers. Bingham.
This is the 30 Longacre Bingham, variation of condition 5 of a previous application to allow a change of a weekday opening hours from 9, which is currently 9 o'clock until 5 o'clock, to extend from Monday to Friday from 9 o'clock until 8 o'clock. And Mr. Pegram, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the application relates to 30 Longacre, just round the corner from where we've considered the previous application. The application site, rather odd shape. The building we're looking at is that one, but it apparently the ownership extends down the driveway, hence it's all outlined in red. Chairman, we gave permission in August 2018 for the change of use of this building from a dwelling house to a physiotherapy. On that permission, condition 5 limited the use of the building for the purpose granted to 9 till 5 Monday to Friday, 9 till midday on Saturday. The current application seeks a variation of that condition to allow them to open until 8 o'clock in the evening on Monday to Friday. My understanding, Chairman, is that the applicant has found that there is a demand to service the needs of people who are working and therefore need to go perhaps in the evening to receive treatment. That's the aerial photograph, again showing the property. The property is in a mixed use area, although it was previously a residential property. It's got offices on this side, and there are other commercial properties across the road and elsewhere on Longacre. That's the main entrance to the building. This is the entrance that would be used by patients attending the treatment at the property. That's looking back the other way. Again, those are offices. The driveway you saw in the plans goes down the side of the building here. Again, just looking at a different angle, picking up the offices next door and the application property. Looking along the street. And then across the road, again, another commercial use on the opposite side of the road. This is stood on that track or driveway to the side. Unusual arrangement here, Chairman. The neighbouring property is butts up or joins onto the rear of the application property. There is as I understand it, it's a right-of-way across here into that doorway you can see, which you can see as a gate into a doorway. That's not, as I understand it, the route used by customers. They use the front door of the property. That was the original layout in terms of when it was a dwelling, and that's the layout as a physiotherapy. So you can see treatment room on the ground floor, reception area, wash area, and 2 treatment rooms on the first floor. One of the areas of concern, Chairman, perhaps relates to the fact that, as I say, you saw the neighbouring property butts on here at the rear of the building, and customers would have to go up and down this staircase to get to the first floor treatment rooms. and there is potential for transmission of noise and disturbance through the party wall. I am advised today, Chairman, that the applicant has actually replaced the old staircase in the building with something which is a little more robust. We didn't feel it was necessary to condition that element, but nevertheless they have, as I understand it, replaced the staircase. So the proposal before you this evening is to vary the hours to allow them 3 hours of an evening, maximum of, I think it results in a maximum of 9 customers over that period, 1 an hour. That's assuming that they get someone in every treatment room. So it's, as I say, the treatment normally takes an hour, 9 patients over the 3 hours maximum. One point perhaps worth considering is that if this was still a dwelling, Chairman, we couldn't control the movements on that staircase. Someone could go up and down on 24/7 in the early hours of the morning, etc. So we don't consider that the potential impact to the neighbour is so significant that it would warrant refusal of this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. Councillor Hull, were you speaking on this, I think? Yes, please.
The resident, Mrs Slater at number 32, originally objected to this application. She maintains her objection, but regrettably she's not able to be here tonight. This objection to the variation to extend the hours of business are based on the fact that the property is in a residential area, and the nearest neighbour, 32 Longacre, will suffer from excessive noise, not only during the day, but now potentially in the evening as well. Now, Longacre is the main road running through Bingham, commencing at the White Lion traffic lights, ending at the computer shop on the corner of Longacre East. Number 30 sits on the southern side of Longacre, with on the west, its immediate neighbour is the accountants, Longacre Studios, and then the Wheatsheaf pub. After that, it is residential on the southern side all the way to Saxondale Island. Travelling east along the southern side, it is residential for 19 houses before reaching the bowling club and Warner's Paddock. Interspersed amongst those 19 houses is the fire station. So 19 houses and 1 fire station. Longacre on the north side of the road travelling east is a dentist, a language school, a nursery and a retail shop. There's 17 houses and 4 businesses. Longacre on the north side of the road travelling west is the hotel on the corner of Market Street, shops, restaurants, businesses, a pub, a florist and a hairdresser's to the White Lion. There are a few houses in between those shops, but there are 14 houses and 12 businesses. It is residential up to Saxondale Island, except for the Nottingham Road stores and Aldi. If you turn to page 38 and paragraph 21, the main issue is the staircase, which is situated along a single brick party wall. A recommendation from the EHO was made for this wall to be insulated. However, the builder reported that sound installation is not possible as there's no access to this wall because the stairs are in the way. However, as Mr. Pegram has mentioned, those stairs have been replaced, so they could have put that in when they replaced it. Now, I don't know how many times going up and down stairs constitutes normal use, but with 2 consulting rooms upstairs, a physiotherapist and a customer going up the stairs together every hour, coming down again after an hour, the next customer going up and down again, times that by 2 consulting rooms seems a lot more than normal use to me. Between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m, there are 7 occasions on the hour for 2 people to be going up, that's 14 journeys. Same 2 people coming down, that's 14 down journeys. Total 28, times that by 2 consulting rooms, and you've got 56 journeys going up and down these stairs. Don't forget, this is a single brick party wall, no insulation whatsoever. Now, the application is to have a further 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock slots, adding 6 more up journeys, 6 more down journeys, times 2, you do the maths, it's 24. Now, I don't know how many members go up and down their stairs at home that many times between 9 a.m. and 8 p.m, but it surely cannot be that the sound of 80 people going up and down the stairs every day is equivalent to a residential property. The last sentence on paragraph 21 states, there could potentially be less noise than from use as a dwelling. I don't know how the officers can justify that statement. Using stairs is not like walking on carpet in the lounge in a house. There's the transference of weight onto every step, compounding the noise. I'd suggest a further report from the EHO is necessary to verify the unacceptable level of noise to number 32. Mrs. Slater has lived at 32 Longacre for 48 years. 30 Longacre is within 200 yards of the shops in Bingham Town. Longacre is ideal for residential, not businesses who could develop their business further out of town where parking would not be an issue. Parking is an issue in Bingham. There's nowhere to park near this premises, which will push clients to try parking on the main road or in the shared access drive at the side of 30 Longacre. I recommend members refuse this variation application on the grounds of increased disturbance to the neighbour. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hull. Councillor Hull is really speaking on behalf of a neighbour at number 32, Mrs. Slater. She considers it a residential area, but is particularly worried about the noise from going up and down stairs. Explained a single brick wall between the two properties, and there could be as many as 56, if not more, journeys up and down stairs as a result of the permission and application. Is there anything you'd like to pick up on that, please?
Yes, Chairman. Councillor Hull also made the reference to the fact that this was ideal as a residential property close to the town centre, just to pick up because it relates to what I'm going to say. Sorry, Chairman, I wasn't correcting you there by any means, but just to remind members that we have already given permission for the use of this property as a physiotherapy clinic. Effectively, we can't revisit the issue of whether it's appropriate to use it as a commercial premises. We've already done that. What you are looking at this evening is an extension of hours into the evening. And again, although Councillor Hull referred to 80 people going up and down the stairs, again, just to bring it back, Chairman, that already 56 of those will effectively be authorised by the previous permission. So it over-exaggerates, in my view, the impact that you are being asked to consider by the extension of 3 hours. It's clearly one for you to judge, Chairman, as decision makers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Well, that's right, and we have comments, we have concerns for and against, and we obviously have. That's what we're here for. We're here to discuss them and come to a decision. So, who would like to start off with this one, please? Yeah, Councillor Clark.
When I was a lot younger, difficult to believe, I know, Chairman, but when I bought my first house in West Bridgeford, it got a single thickness party wall, and the staircase went right up by the party wall, the next door, and next door it got 4 young children, which pounded up and down the stairs quite regularly. Have there been any complaints about noise from this commercial operation up to date from the neighbours?
Do we know if
Chairman, I can only answer that by saying I've not been made aware of any. I don't know whether they have or not, but I've not been made aware of any.
Right, okay. So, what are you chuntering about? What do you mean it's not open yet?
Yeah, just please behave.
So, if it was as has already been mentioned, if it was a family house, it could well have children running up and down stairs. I would doubt considerably whether physiotherapist patients would be running up and down stairs. I'm sure they would be placing their feet fairly reasonably. I don't think that's a valid objection myself, Chairman, and I think that the proposal is reasonable.
Thank you. Right, who else would like to come in on this? Is Councillor Edwards, please.
Thank you, Chair. This physiotherapy clinic, as I understand it, there's no mention here and nobody has suggested to it that it has any equipment which creates a noise nuisance. So we're solely, the objection outlined is solely about the noise from human feet going up and down stairs. The application is certainly in my view, a reasonable one. Physiotherapy is something that often people need during their working lives, and an extension till 8 o'clock in the evening provides that sort of flexibility and service that individuals these days expect. The days when every shop and every business was a 9 till 5:30 have long gone, and people don't expect to have those sorts of restrictions. This is, I think, as Councillor Clark said, this is a reasonable application. I think it would be very difficult to sustain an objection to it, and I think it would be very difficult to sustain an argument that the levels of noise are such that we ought to turn it down when we've been told it's on a main road. I suspect there's more noise from the fire station at any time of the day or night when those vehicles are needed. So, I mean, on that basis, I would move the recommendation for approval.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. And who? Sorry, Councillor Jones. No, actually, sorry. Do you have a seconder for that recommendation, please, Councillor Mayles? So proposed by Councillor Edwards, seconded by Councillor Mayles. Councillor Jones, please.
And I agree with much of what Councillor Edwards has just said. And I take it that the fact that the applicant has changed the staircase suggests that there's some awareness of the potential nuisance to the neighbour. And I just wonder whether the officer can clarify, is that the case? Is the applicant aware that there's a potential nuisance to the neighbour? And is there any way of adding an advisory that says, will you please take account in the whatever you do with that, with the stairs, that it reduces the noise as much as possible?
Do we know if, or is it just a coincidence?
Chairman, I can't answer for what the applicant might be aware of in terms of potential impacts. What I am aware of is that they are clearly aware of the concerns raised by the neighbour in that respect, because her comments are in the public domain, obviously. So their response to that has been to try and be a good neighbour, I guess, and to replace what was perhaps an old rickety staircase with something a little bit more substantial. But as I say, I can't answer for whether they feel that there is likely to be impacts. That's I can't speak for somebody else.
Okay.
I just wondered what the other question was, whether it's possible to add some advisory that the applicant
well, perhaps a comment from the Environmental Health Officer in paragraph 9 is helpful in that respect. Is it well, first of all, it does not consider additional sound insulations necessary in this instance, but he also refers at the end about the 12-month.
Yeah. Again, Chairman, we didn't, as planning officers, consider that a 12-month restriction satisfied the tests for planning conditions, given that we've already granted permission for this to operate 9 till 5. I guess maybe we've said worst case scenario, if all 3 consulting rooms are used every hour for the extra 3 hours, that could be 9 people. Perhaps the only advisory, and again, we wouldn't be able to enforce this, but that they consider, using the treatment room on the ground floor before resorting to using the one on the first floor. If that gives members any comfort.
Does that give members comfort, or do we need it, or not? No, I don't think
we don't think it's necessary.
No, we don't. But again, we need to remember that the application is not. We're not deciding on whether it should or should not be a physiotherapy unit, but we are literally just discussing about extension of use hours. So, right, does anyone else want to comment on this, or shall we make a decision? No. Okay, so it's been, the recommendation has been moved and seconded by Councillor Edwards and Councillor Mayles. I'll have a show of hands, please, for those in favour of the application as per the report. And no one, anyone against? No, so that's unanimous. Permission is granted. But thank you. And Councillor Hull, you could at least tell your neighbour, the neighbour, that we have discussed the application and very carefully and given it consideration. I'm getting a few indications. Are you wanting a comfort break? Can we cope with a comfort break for about 5 minutes? 8:10 now, 8:15 back. Is that all right? Are we happy with that? Yeah, and I'm aware.
I'll withdraw
yes,
now.
Because
yes.
We have another application. It wouldn't be fair for you to be here for part of it and then leave. So I do appreciate and understand the family reasons that you have to go home. So thank you, Councillor Edwards. We'll take a short break now and try and be back for anyone who wants to have a comfort break for 8:15. Righty-ho, we're back. We're just after 8:15. We are one member down because, as Councillor Edwards said, he has to, for family reasons, has to depart. So we'll go on to our next application, which is 4 Brown Lane, Barton in Fabus. Single-storey front extension, single-storey side and rear extension, and a 2-storey rear extension. Mr. Pegram, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, just a couple of corrections in terms of the report. Firstly, on page 43, close to the bottom of paragraph 3, we refer to the building being located approximately 8 metres from the boundary with 1 Brown Lane. It's, forget my pointer, where's it gone? There it is. It's that property there. However, having checked, that is actually 1 Chestnut Lane, not 1 Brown Lane. But obviously the distances remain the same. It's only the description of the property. Also, Chairman, in paragraph, if I remember where it is now, 27, we talk about the footprint increase of the building and the volume increase. Apologies, Chairman, we've in light of the submission by the applicant, we have rechecked our figures, and we believe, depending on how you measure it, because there is a lean-to the front of the building that was removed at some point in the past, but we calculate the increase to be in the region of 91%. Again, Chairman, that doesn't change our recommendation for the reasons which I will describe in a moment. So the application relates to 4 Brown Lane, the property which is outlined in red on the screen, has been sort of adapted the plan just to give you a feel, but obviously I'll show you the application plans in a moment, which are more important. This is the, again, the property on the aerial view. Barton in Fabus is washed over by Greenbelt, so it is in the Greenbelt, and it's therefore subject to Greenbelt policy. This is the property in question, looking from the entrance in to the property. Quite an attractive cottage-style property with some outbuildings to the right here. Looking back the other way to pick up the property on Chestnut Lane. This is where I believe, I'm led to believe, certainly the photos would support, there was previously an extension in this position, or a single-storey element in this position, which has been removed at some point in the past. And then looking across the neighbouring property on Brown Lane, number 6 Brown Lane, again, that's referred to by the applicant. We granted permission June last year, I think it was, for some extensions to that property. This is now at the rear as a single-storey building, housing what looks like a boiler perhaps. And then looking across the rear of the property where the 2-storey extension would project out, and you can see number 6 in the background. Just a slightly different angle, picking up both properties in that view, and then standing back, looking at the rear of number 4, and just a different angle again, moving around the garden. And then that's looking across again at the property on Chestnut Lane, with the proximity of the application property to it. So that's the existing property as you saw in the photographs. Generally L-shaped footprint with a single-storey lean-to extension on the side, or addition element. And then this is the proposal which is before members this evening. So it includes reinstatement, call it that, of the single-storey element at the front of the building, a single-storey wraparound element at the side and rear, and then a 2-storey extension on the rear of the building there. That is the photograph. I suspect the applicant may wish to refer to this photograph. This is the photograph that confirms that at some point in the past there was a single-storey element on the front of the building, and that's the approved scheme for the neighbouring pair of semi-detached properties. Again, if the applicant wishes me to refer to those during this presentation, I will do. Chairman, the crux of this one really is the site, as I mentioned, is in the Greenbelt, is therefore subject to Greenbelt policy. As we know, paragraph 145 of the NPPF tells us that new buildings, including extensions, are deemed to be inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. Paragraph 145 contains a closed list of exceptions to development which will be regarded as not inappropriate. Double negative, I'm afraid. And effectively in that list is the extension or addition to an existing dwelling, providing the additions do not result in a disproportionate increase over and above the original dwelling. Chairman, we don't have a policy, it's not that easy. We haven't got a policy that says 50% is acceptable, 60% is acceptable, 70% is unacceptable. It is a matter of judgment in each case, and although we don't have a policy, we use as a guideline figure 50% as an increase over and above the original. In this instance, as I've alerted you to, and the applicant seems to confirm by his own figures, we believe that the increase is in the region of 90%. Your officers do consider that that is a disproportionate increase over and above the original dwelling. We therefore consider that this is inappropriate development. Members must give significant weight to that factor, and permission should only be granted if they believe that very special circumstances exist to justify the grant of planning permission. On the basis of the Greenbelt policies, Chairman, we are therefore recommending refusal to the application as set out on page 48, on the basis that, as I say, the increase in the size of the building is disproportionate. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. And we have two speakers for this application. First of all, we have the Mr. Harrison, who is the applicant. So I'm sure you've seen how it works this evening. There's everyone else sitting at the table there. And as soon as you're ready, it's the right-hand button, and the red light will come on, and then the clock will start counting down. And if you're still speaking at 5 minutes, I have to cut you off. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm John Harrison, the applicant. Me and my wife have lived in the house since 2002. My grandparents have lived in there since 1930s. The property at the moment just has one bathroom and WC, 3 bedrooms with very low ceiling heights, a kitchen and a living room. And there is about 18% of the ground floor that is uninhabitable due to the size of the rooms with heights, etc., just used for storage. I want to just bring you on to these slides, if I may. We've attached some additional information. As you can see, that slide there just shows you the footprint of the building in 1965. Shows you the original front, it used to be a wash house, it was called, on there, which we wish to reinstate. It shows you also the picture of the next door neighbours, number 6. And the size of their property in relation to ours. If we could move on to the next slide. Number 6 has been granted permission. I'd like to draw your attention that their original footprint increase is 133% to the original footprint of their house. Ours is actually 82%, which we disagree with the 91% that they've mentioned. They are extending within 1 metre of our property, and their property extends out the back. There should be another slide. That's it. So this slide here shows you the extension of our neighbours and the extension of ours. So we feel it's what the council, we have no objections from anybody bar the planning officers, yet they've accepted an extension to the next door neighbours, which had basically a lean-to and a garage put next to it, which had no planning permission whatsoever, and they've accepted that as part of the footprint. So that's how they've sort of managed to get their extension approved. Majority of the cottages within the village have been doubled, etc. None of this Greenbelt has been put forward prior to that to anybody else. It's a little bit of a bitter pill to swallow when they start going on about Greenbelt, as they're planning to build 3,000 houses and industrial units within our parish. The planning officers and conservation officers have in the report indicated that the design is appropriate, and the proposal is incorporating a number of features that are reflected to the existing building and considered sympathetic. you know, we're living here. We do not want to spoil our house. We just want to bring it into the 21st century. In fact, we want to bring it into the 22nd century. We don't want to keep extending to it. We want to be able to incorporate upstairs a new bathroom which we can actually have a proper shower in, rather than a shower basically 6 inches above my head. Literally the rooms in the house are very, very low, so it just causes us so much trouble with storage. It's not an excuse, it's a great house to live in, but it's just sometimes difficult. It looks large, but it's not that large. Regards the size and massing, the house next door is over 1 metre higher. It's 7.5 metres roof height. Ours is only 6.5 at the highest pitch and 5.9 at the lowest pitch. So when they're on about massing, you know, our extension will actually balance out and be more proportional once our neighbour's extension is built. We're not overlooking anybody. Sorry about that. And there's no impact into the area. Neighbours have not complained. We just would like you to consider and accept this application.
Okay, thank you. Wow, 5 seconds to go. That's couldn't be much.
I didn't read all from it.
So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Our other speaker on this item is Councillor Walker, the ward member for the area for Barton. And as soon as you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This decision, in my humble opinion, comes down to a narrow issue. Would this development harm the green belt? To be inappropriate, it should be harmful. Where is the potential harm? The scale and massing proposed is greatest on the rear elevation. The officer's report notes that the design is sympathetic to the original house. It further notes that there are no issues for overlooking nor privacy. It would, quote, have a negligible impact on residential amenity, and quotes, ample residential amenity space would remain. The proposed scheme would not harm the open character of the greenbelt. When built, it will look like the numerous other extended properties in the village. The design, with its massing concentrated on the rear elevation, would not harm the visual amenity of the area. In all of these aspects, one finds oneself asking the question, who is best placed to judge harm? It must be noted that the application has attracted 0 objections. The neighbours, the parish council, the community don't consider this harmful. The issue appears to be one of sizing. Here, the permission granted next door at number 6 is relevant. You've been provided with data about the relevant proportional increases of the 2 properties. In essence, they are very similar. The development at number 6 was not judged to be disproportionate and therefore harmful due to the garage and lean-to being included in the calculations. The development at number 4 has been assessed as being disproportionate, with its lean-to and previous front elements not having been included in the calculations. The harm or otherwise to the green belt surely must be assessed in terms of what will be there in the end when the development has been completed. In this regard, the 2 developments are very similar, and as such, I would invite you to grant the application subject to appropriate conditions.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Walker. So we heard from Mr. Harrison, who's the applicant, explained the family history and living there since 2002 and grandparents since the 1930s, and points out the limitations of the current, for the family, of the current layout and room sizes. We also saw a photograph, an aerial photograph from 1965 showing a front extension. He also pointed out that many cottages and similar houses have been altered and increased in the village, and they want this work done for family reasons. And Councillor Walker also supports the application, pointing out or questioning what harm to the greenbelt, and also points out the scale of massing is within similarities to next door, and doesn't consider that it will have an effect on the amenity space or harm the appearance or harm the visual amenity. So I think that's covered most of the points. Would you like to pick up, please?
Yes, please, Chairman. Just a couple of points. The reference was made to the Clifton development, or land south of Clifton development. Clearly that is a strategic allocation in our core strategy, delivering up to 3,000 houses to assist in meeting the housing needs of the borough. That site was previously within the Greenbelt, but has been removed through the adoption of the core strategy. So that land is no longer Greenbelt. It's a very well-considered decision to take out the Greenbelt, applying a sort of set of tests to judge the value of the site in terms of its contribution to the Greenbelt. This is a difficult one, Chairman. Councillor Walker asked what the harm is. Just to reiterate the policy position, Chairman, the new buildings in the Greenbelt are deemed inappropriate. The NPPF, paragraph 145, gives a closed list of developments which are deemed to be not inappropriate, including extensions to dwellings where there is not a disproportionate increase in size. It's really for members to judge whether there is a disproportionate increase in size here. However, Chairman, in terms of where the harm is, if, as officers have, if members as decision makers deem that the development is inappropriate, then the NPPF advises us that that is harmful by definition. That's before you've considered the physical form of the extension and the impact it has visually. So if it's inappropriate development, it is harmful by definition, and you must give that matter significant weight. Yes, there is a test of openness, and you must then apply, if it's inappropriate development, whether or not there is harm, further harm or other harm to the Greenbelt by reason of impact on openness. Chairman, just in terms of the elements here, I guess it's really, as far as your officers are concerned, the two-storey element is of main concern. Clearly, cumulatively, the additions result, in our opinion, in a disproportionate increase. If I can draw members' attention to paragraph 33, which does say, however, it is considered that the scale and massing of the two-storey rear extension would lead to an over-intensive form of development contrary to policy 10 of the core strategy and policy GP2 of the Rushcliffe Borough non-statutory replacement local plan. The extensions would fail to retain the form and character of the original dwelling and would not appear subordinate to it. So clearly, Chairman, it's the cumulative impact of these extensions that are of concern to your officers. The single-storey extension at the front reinstates a historic feature that was there in the past, as you've seen from photographs. The single-storey wraparound extension on the side/rear is subordinate and not considered to be of concern. The main area of concern is in relation to that two-storey element, which is excuse me, Chairman, quite a sizable addition. One might ask why we didn't include a reason why that was over-intensive, but clearly we focused on the main policy concerns in relation to the Greenbelt policy. If we come back to the neighbouring property, Chairman, yes, I can see how it may appear to the applicant and other people how it may be unfair, potentially. Unfortunately, planning isn't based on whether it's fair or unfair. We have allowed quite a large extension. I think it's looking at the history of this one, there is a very sizable single width garage, quite a deep building, sits in that position with a lean-to conservatory link, again running pretty much the length of that garage. They are not part of the original building, accepted, but I think in determining that application, we did give some weight to those extensions which were on the site, may have been constructed potentially under permitted development, or part of it at least. So again, yes, clearly that has been referred to. It is relevant to your consideration. However, Chairman, you must consider the application on its own merits, and you have the advice of your officers in terms of the Greenbelt policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. I think that covered those points. So we'll open up for a discussion now, please. And Councillor Clark, please. Well, your name is first on the list.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
You were the first one to indicate.
I forgot what I was going to say now. Greenbelt. And I think, as Mr. Pegram has acknowledged, Greenbelt does not mean you cannot build anything, and he acknowledges that. But there are other policies involved. And I think the ward members' first couple of sentences, I think that is exactly the questions I was going to ask. What is the harm to the Greenbelt? And I've had my drone flying around above Brown Lane and some of the other lanes, and this subject property is one of the smaller properties in that area at the moment. And I look and I try to see, well, is it going to have any harm to the openness? No, because there is no open countryside visible from that property. And it boils down to proportionality. And I've been trying to see, well, why should it be disproportionate? Because I don't view proportionality purely and utterly on the size of the building. I would take into account in proportionality, is it proportional to the site that it stands on? And I am absolutely struggling to see what the harm would be to the Greenbelt of this proposal. I cannot see any harm at all. Mr. Pegram acknowledged paragraph 26, talking about the Greenbelt MPPF, and that a local planning authority should regard the construction of new buildings as inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. One of the exceptions is the extension or alteration, provided it does not result in disproportionate additions. I don't view these additions as disproportionate. I think it will, because it is a building in a village that's been there a long time, a building that is unique. And that uniqueness allows it to have something different added to it. It is not as though, if this disproportionality, if it was a house on an estate, you know, and suddenly somebody came along and wanted to build an extension that was twice the size of the original house, of course that would be disproportionate because they are sort of conventional houses. This property is unique, and I really cannot see the harm that is being caused. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Clark. Do we want to come back at this point, Mr. Pegram?
Yeah, Chairman, it's just really more clarity on this Greenbelt policy issue, because it is one that I think a lot of people wrestle with. Just to reiterate, paragraph 145 says local planning authority should regard the construction of new buildings as inappropriate in the Greenbelt. Exceptions to this are, and including in the list, is the extension or alteration of a building providing that it does not result in a disproportionate additions over and above the size of the original building. So it's a case law tells us this is a closed list. So unless it's in this list, it's inappropriate development. It doesn't say disproportionate size when judged with neighbouring buildings, the size of the plot or the area in general. So members must focus on the size of the building as it stands at the moment, albeit it sits in a good sized plot, but the closed list is quite clear. You are looking at additions over and above the size of the original building, not anything else. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Clark.
Just to clarify, Chairman, so Mr Pegram has said in his earlier comments that there is no percentage defined by which a building becomes disproportionate. So I stick with my comments that, in my view, because of the nature of this property, it is not a disproportionate addition. There is no defined percentage. It's not 21.2 or it's not 173.6. There is no defined percentage. And there's something else that I was just about to refer to, and it's clean gone out. Oh yes, a little minor thing of proposing, Mr Chairman, that planning permission that this proposal be approved, subject to whatever conditions might be deemed appropriate.
Right, so you're proposing approval then, subject to conditions. Do you want to perhaps have a think about what those such conditions might be?
Well, they might. I suspect that Mr Pegram would be suggesting things like simple things like plans submitted, and there must be several normal or standard conditions that go with an approval.
You've heard that. Do you want to say anything at this point?
Yes, Chairman, I do, if I may. Yes, there are some conditions which are in my mind if members are minded to grant permission. However, I need, first of all, to get over maybe the thorny issue. If Councillor Clark is proposing approval, as a local planning authority, we must clearly demonstrate the reasons why we are minded to approve. We don't only have to give reasons when we refuse. We must give reasons when we are minded to approve.
Against policy.
Particularly if it's against national and local planning policy, yes. So clearly, the scenarios are here. Either that it is a disproportionate increase, but there are very special circumstances, or I think Councillor Clark is suggesting that he doesn't consider, and clearly it's a matter for the whole committee, this to be a disproportionate increase over and above the original building. I do struggle with that, Chairman, because it's nearly doubling the size of the building, but I clearly need an indication from the Councillor Clark as moving approval and also acceptance by any seconder that there is a clear indication of the reason why permission is being granted.
So do you want to think about that, Councillor Clark, while I have another, because I've got another couple of speakers.
Well, I'll have to think about it, Mr Chairman, but I would like to... What's the matter?
Oh, is it?
Mike, is it on? Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I apologise.
But I would like to press Mr Pegram in this quasi-judicial circumstance that he used the phrase, this will be doubling the size, which indicates to me that's sort of around the 100% mark. So is Mr Pegram suggesting to the committee that 100% is disproportionate?
Chairman, your officers consider that the development is disproportionate because clearly we've recommended refusal. So yes, we do believe that something in the region of 80, 90, 100% would be a disproportionate increase.
Thank you, Mr Pegram. I'm going to go to Councillor Hull now, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify with Mr Pegram, please? The main objection is to the two-storey element at the rear, and therefore then, because adding that onto the front extension and the L-shaped side extension is just too much. Can I therefore clarify, if the front extension is within material considerations and whether the L-shaped also could be done without planning permission, and therefore then if the two-storey element at the back was reduced in size, not to 2 stories but 1, would that be approved?
You like testing my knowledge, Chair. Right, so the front extension would not be permitted development because it's forward of the principal elevation facing a highway. The L-shaped bit, if I could find my cursor, so the L-shaped bit runs there. Now, because it does that, it's projecting from the side of a side elevation, a side extension cannot exceed more than half the width of the original building. But in measuring the dimensions of the extension, you're not just looking at that bit. The guidance that we have from government tells us that that is the side extension, even though part of it is rear. And clearly that to there is more than half the width of the original building. So those proposals that are before you tonight could not be constructed as permitted development. The issue, yes, as I alluded to and is referred to in paragraph 33, it is a cumulative increase of all the extensions, but I suppose the element that causes us greatest concern is the two-storey bit at the back.
Is that helpful, Councillor Holt? Right. Councillor Mrs Smith, please. Yeah, well, your name is here. You must have indicated.
I thought you said there were two before me. There we are. No, I'm thinking of, sorry, I've forgotten the gentleman's name, the applicant. Mr Harrison. He referred to the fact of the very low ceilings and that 18% of the ground floor was not livable space, only used for storage. And it's only got one bathroom and one toilet in the house. And we are in the 21st century. And I think most people, all the developers that are building, including the ones that will be building at Barton, well, sorry, what's it called, Clifton Meadows, will be putting in at least 2 bathrooms, I suspect, in each of the houses, and the spare loo as well. So I think to make it habitable, it does need an extension. Mr Pegram's looking fed up with me.
No, I'm not fed up at all, Chairman. I'm just chuckling because I will admit my property only has 1 bathroom and toilet in it, and therefore are you suggesting my property's inhabitable?
Has it got low ceilings?
I should quit.
I think, Chairman, what Councillor Smith is probably alluding to is if members considered it to be disproportionate, would those be very special circumstances? And I think no, in my view.
Given the height of ceilings and things. I mean, if Mr Harrison and his family decided that they couldn't cope with this any longer and were to try and sell it, the question is, would anybody buy it with the thought that they can't extend it? So it may fall to rapid ruin.
Well, Councillor, no, I understand what you're saying there, but we can't really. That's not a material. That's not a planning decision matter, is it? Let's be honest. It's not a material planning.
The house itself isn't actually
speculating
listed,
as to whether a house will sell or not.
Right.
I think I'm right in saying that.
Yes, you're correct.
Yes. No.
I'll second it.
So you are seconding the approval. Right. Okay. Does anyone else wish to speak on this item? No. Councillor Purdue-Horrod.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. This is an interesting one. And I think what comes down to it for me is we must judge each application on its own merits and obviously the considerations of this committee. And this falls between a few stools for me. Barton-in-Fabis is washed over by the Greenbelt. That's not the fault of the residents of Barton-in-Fabis. It just happens to be the situation. I'm sure in the past, I think we proposed through the local development framework to remove some villages from the Greenbelt so that it would be surrounded. It's a shame, perhaps, maybe we need to think about Barton-in-Fabis in the future. And it's interesting when the government impose upon us, 13,000 odd dwellings, that Greenbelt becomes a bit awkward. So the best thing is get rid of part of the Greenbelt and we'll stick 3,000 houses where it used to be. And we have the situation where we accept there has to be more housing for all sorts of people, families in particular. And we have a situation here, it would seem to me, a very old dwelling that is clearly, what we've been told this evening, is restrictive for a family. We can argue about the actual design that's put before us, but the attempt appears to be to refresh and renew an existing dwelling rather than just simply moving off to a new 3 or 4 bed property that we've just built in what was the Greenbelt. So, as we do not have a policy actually in place for what percentage is acceptable, and it's very subjective as what is not acceptable, as a phrase that's been used to me fairly recently, would the man on the Clapham omnibus think that this is reasonable? Yeah, I don't think it's unreasonable, so I'm going to support Councillor Clark's proposal.
Right, thank you, Councillor Purdue. Mr. Pegram, you want to come back on that, don't you?
No, Chairman, I was just wondering whether Councillor Clark had given further thought to the reason, because I have to press, I do apologise, I do have to press for the reason for granting planning permission, and whilst having the floor, I would talk about, yes, potential conditions. Clearly, yes, plans, materials, 3-year time limit, and there's also, Chairman, I would draw attention to the Conservation Officer's comments on page 44. This is a situation where, because of the extent of the rear extension and knowledge of archaeological interest in the area, where he believes that there is a justification for an archaeological watching brief condition. So in addition to my plans, materials and time limit, there would be an archaeological condition. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. It's difficult to remember the exact wordings that Mr. Pegram quoted, and so I'd like to ask him to repeat those that he quoted. Are 2 options, as far as I recall.
Yes, sorry. Chairman, yes, members must, in considering this application, it is clearly it is in the Greenbelt. Sorry, to clarify the point that Councillor Purdue-Horan raised, we have proposed removal of certain settlements from the Greenbelt. This is one that we are not proposing for removal, in part because we are not suggesting that there should be any growth in Barton-in-Fabis itself, and there's no justification, therefore, to review the Greenbelt boundary around Barton-in-Fabis. So it is in the Greenbelt. Members must give regard to the Greenbelt policy. It's a fundamental policy issue. And therefore, members must either, if they believe that the extensions are disproportionate, it is therefore inappropriate development and harmful by definition. In that circumstance, the policy tells us that we should not grant planning permission unless there are very special circumstances which outweigh the harm, either by definition or any other harm. I'm not reading that, actually, that's just from memory, Chairman. The alternative is that members, in judging this proposal, determine that the extension is not disproportionate over and above the original dwelling. Clearly, Chairman, my guidance was that it's difficult to argue that 90%, let's go in the middle, is not disproportionate. Thank you.
Is that clear
Oh,
for you?
we got the answer eventually.
Well, you did ask a question.
No, I asked the question about what the 2 options were given. I didn't ask for a rerun of the arguments to refuse it.
You know, but you need that because this is a very serious. This is a difficult decision to make.
Well, it is.
This one tonight, it really is.
But I've made my decision, and my decision, Chairman, is that planning permission. Well, my decision. Is that planning permission should be given on the grounds that it is not disproportionate and therefore, by definition, not harmful to the Greenbelt.
So you've heard those words, Mr. Pegram. Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Yes, it is difficult, and I can see the officer's objection to the rather large 2-storey extension at the back. But what I want to clarify is, and it may have been clarified and I've missed it, is the front extension. The front extension, it appears to be replacing something that existed many years ago. Is that included in the 90% calculation, or is it not? Because given that historically it existed, and if it's being designed to fit with the existing property, then the 90% becomes more questionable. I just want to know that really, because I agree that 90% is too much, but if that is taken into account, then it makes a difference.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. I think we're just looking up the figures at the moment, so just bear with us a second.
Chairman, I'll give you both versions as I see it, best way so it's fair. The applicant did send members some information which you all have available to you. Yeah. In that he does do a comparison of the increase of 4 Browns Lane by the proposal. As I say, depending on whether you include or exclude that single-storey element at the front, it does change some of the sort of figures. Their figures, I'll give you their figures first. Ground floor footprint of the original building is 90 square metres. They've calculated the extension at 74 square metres, an 82% increase. The building volume of the original, they have calculated at 440 cubic metres. Proposed extension 430 cubic metres. They calculate that to be 98%. They include a footnote which says figures do not include the ground floor front element to be rebuilt, as this was part of the original building, as can be seen from the aerial photograph from 1965 submitted with the planning application. Yes, it was part of the original building, but it has been removed. Even if you ignore that element, as the applicant has done in his own figures, you're ending up with an increase of 90 to 98%. I think our figures, without the lean-to, or without the front section, no, sorry, our figures, we have a slight difference of opinion here in terms of, in fact, ours is a bit more under the levels of the applicant's raised. Yeah. The original dwelling, including the front extension, we are getting still an increase of around 90-91%. Without the bit on the front, it's 85%. However, Chairman, even at 85%, your officer's view is that that's disproportionate. But clearly, we've had a motion on a different opinion.
Thank you. Does that help answer your question, Councillor Jones? Okay, thank you. Do we have any speakers on this, or shall we? This really is one of those decisions. It's one of the reasons we have a planning committee. Whichever way it goes tonight, someone's going to be relieved, and other people will be will be disappointed. But we need to come to a decision. We've got the proposal to grant permission, proposed by Councillor Clark and seconded by Councillor Smith, with the conditions we've just been discussing. So are we all clear on that? Yes, relevant conditions. So are we clear on what we are making a decision on, we're voting on? So we need to, you're clear on this. So I need to have a show of hands now. So this is in favour of the revised recommendation to grant permission with those conditions. Can I have a show of hands in favour, please? One, two, three, 7. And those against, please show. Right, so that means permission is granted for the as moved by Councillor Clark and Councillor Smith with the conditions. So thank you. That's a decision taken. Thank you. So we'll come on to our final application for tonight, which is Paradise Farm, the Rushes Gotham. It's to insert 2 Velux conservation windows in the north-facing slope roof, insert bifold doors and gable window in east-facing gable, and insert first floor window in the east-facing elevation. And Mr. Pegram, please.
Chairman, could I just interrupt just a second? Could the minutes just note that Councillor Walker has left the room, please?
Yes, Councillor Walker, of course, is the applicant on this. We've noted that, haven't we? So, pardon? No, he's not speaking, but we've noted he was in the room, but he left the room for this item. No, he's not now. All right. So, right, sorry, Mr.
That's fine, Chairman, thank you. To get all procedures correct.
Absolutely.
So this relates to Paradise Farm in Gotham, situated on the Rushes, with Hollands Close to the north. Gotham is washed over by Greenbelt currently, but it is one of the settlements that we are proposing to remove from the Greenbelt and inset, or most of it at least. The good thing here, Chairman, is we're not looking at any additions over and above the volume of the original building, so we're not going to get into a debate about whether it's disproportionate. You sure? Yes, definitely, Chairman, definitely. This is the property looking from the rushes. Slightly different angle, looking into the property with the access here. Looking through back onto the rushes from within the sort of courtyard area of the building. And this is the sort of main property, lovely old farmhouse, lots of character. Clearly, Chairman, part of the proposal involves the insertion of windows at first floor level. The history to this is that we've had a debate with the owner of the property as to what is front, side and rear. New windows in the first floor side elevation require permission unless they are obscure glazed and fixed shut to a point 1.7 metres above the floor level of the room they serve. As I say, it's not clear what is side, front and rear, hence we have the application before us this evening. Again, just looking, that's the element as you come in off the rushes, looking across the parking area. That's the neighbouring property on the rushes, which is a modern property. Again, further along, looking across the front garden to the application property, or side garden, whichever you consider to be front, side and rear. Just skipping through to give you a feel for the character of the building. This is the point where it's proposed to put 2 roof lights in the roof of the building. I should have gone back and you can see there's a proposed to put a window in that position there where that board is. And then the other main change relates to the gable of the building where it's proposed to insert a feature window here. This is a dovecot and proposed triangular window up here, and then remove this bay and insert either bifold doors or French doors. We've considered the application on the basis of bifold doors. You'll see there's a condition that relates to that, or an informative that relates to if an alternative is pursued. Just while I'm on this point, Chairman, you will see in your agenda we were recommending a condition of building recording. This is a building of local interest. It's not listed grade 1 or 2, but it is a building of local interest, so it's therefore deemed to be a non-designated heritage asset. The proposal would convert the dovecot in here into additional accommodation, and it's felt that there was needed to be a process of recording of the information of the heritage asset. That information has now been provided, and we are therefore recommending that that condition no longer be imposed on any grant of planning permission, because we now have the information that we were seeking. If I go through, again, that's the proposed window there, again there, and then just that's the bay window that would be removed and replaced with either bifold doors or French doors. If I get to the nitty-gritty bit rather than lots of photos, Chairman, because it's showing a lot of the same. You can even annotate things like this. It's good, isn't it? So you've got, Chairman, the existing at the top, the proposed at the bottom. That's the window that's proposed where you saw the timber boarding. That's the window to go in the gable end of the where the dovecot is, and that's where the bay window would be removed and replaced with French doors or bifold doors. On the other side of the roof, that's the position where the 2 Velux roof lights would be inserted. Clearly, Chairman, as I say, this is before you, really on the debate, well, 2 points. Technicality, they are first floor side windows and therefore require permission, and it's clearly only before you because the applicant is a councillor of the Borough Council. Your officers are satisfied that the proposals are sympathetic and it's recommended for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. So would anyone like to speak to this, or would anyone like to make a proposal? But Councillor Jones.
I'm quite happy to move it, but I would like to ask whether the late representations, which appear to suggest that some of the dovecot will be preserved, be reflected in the conditions, because that seems like, to me, reading it, there's no problem, except you thought, well, that's a historical asset, but what's not said in the report is said from the applicant's agent, and I just think that I don't know whether you've got a drawing that shows that or whatever, but it just felt important to reflect that. I'm happy to move the recommendation.
We have got the information. This isn't, as I said, this isn't a listed building, so it's not statutorily listed. It is only a building of local interest. If it wasn't a building of local interest, then the loss of or otherwise presence of the dovecot would not be a factor. Effectively, because it's not statutorily listed, we're not in a position to insist that the dovecot or any features within the dovecot are retained. It is a matter of building recording, and the condition sought to request information about the appearance, location and everything of the dovecot and the nesting boxes, which we now have in our possession. We have photographs and we have plans showing where those photographs were taken from, and some of the dovecots would be retained. Some would be lost, it's fair, but if I look at, and if I get my cursor onto the right screen, there's a little doorway here which would actually be into a void under the floor of the accommodation. So there would be some of the dovecot nesting boxes would be retained. Clearly, you can't retain them all and convert it to habitable accommodation. So again, hopefully that explains the reason why it's not.
Yeah, no, the question more precisely perhaps would be, it says the additional information included a detailed drawing of the conversion reference, and if that reference is part of the application, then fine.
Yes, Chairman, it has now been submitted effectively as part of the application and therefore obviates the need for the condition.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder for your Councillor Hull? Would anyone else like to make any comments or speak on this? No, I think we're probably near. Yeah. So let's go to the vote, please. Can we have a show of hands in favour of the application? And just to confirm, no one against. So that's unanimous. That's decision granted. And then finally, we have just a report. Frustrating, I think, but there we are. It's a report of planning appeals. Would you like to say anything about this? Not really.
I did speak about it last meeting, Chairman.
Yes.
Unless there's any questions that members have about it.
Well, this is the one that I think it's fair to say we're rather frustrated and disappointed about. But that's just my view, and I suspect it's members' views. But this was the decision overturned by an inspector for the traveller site in Scriveton. Details in the report. So, just noted. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your contribution. It's been a very interesting meeting and very. But that's what we're here for. Make a decision. So, thank you. Safe journeys home.